Welcome to this lecture on human capital theory. This is our first foray into the philosophies of education, the 5 traditions that we will explore in the upcoming weeks. Human capital may be the most prominent philosophy of education currently at play. It certainly is fairly dominant in our public discourse about education. Human capital theory has some basic assumptions. First assumption is that significant individual and societal economic benefits are derived from investment in people. And this is hence the notion of human capital, that human beings are a part of the economic equation. In particular, their education, the educational level of the workforce is a fundamental dimension of economic efficiency and effectiveness from the perspective of this theory. Education develops skills that lead to increased productivity. It's an assumption that there's a fundamental interconnection relationship between education, economic skill, and productivity. A third assumption is that individuals act rationally to maximize their economic utility, and therefore it is rational for them to increase their economic skill through education. And that the fourth assumption is that the maximization of aggregate economic utility is the primary measure of social good or the well-being of the society. We tend to measure how well the society is doing by how well its economy is doing in terms of aggregate measures such as gross national product, GNP, or gross domestic product, GDP. The basic equation of human capital theory is that individuals are born with a certain innate talent, and that there's a normal distribution of talent in the population. And that's the fundamental criterion for education from the perspective of human capital. That is, the education should be responsive to the differentiated levels of talent, innate talent, in the population. That is, its curriculum should be differentiated based upon talent. We can measure talent, and based upon the measurement of that talent, students with different levels of talent should be given and experience different sorts of curriculum. Education is also seen as a sorting device, the major social sorting device, which identifies levels of potential as well as skill in terms of educational performance. So the idea in human capital theory is that the student has a certain level of capability, of innate talent, and that talent should be developed to as high degree as possible through the educational process, different processes for different talent levels, and that education primarily develops cognitive skill in the students relative to their talent, and socializes students to take their place in the labor force. So education develops cognitive skill. And then productivity, economic productivity, is thought to be contingent upon levels of cognitive skill. The greater the cognitive skill, the greater the productivity. There's a direct correspondence, or relationship between cognitive skill and productivity in this theory. And productivity then leads to wealth. The greater the productivity, the greater the wealth, the greater the income. And productivity should be rewarded by increased wealth. So the basic equation is that individuals with high talent, high innate talent, will be given a particular education to develop that talent, and in particular to develop their cognitive skill. That cognitive skill will eventually translate into productivity, which will then translate into wealth, both wealth for the individual and wealth for the society. There are some primary philosophical assumptions at work in the theory. An assumption about human nature, that human beings are primarily producers, possessors, and consumers of economic utility. It's an economic view of the human being. That the good is conceived as the maximization of individual and societal economic utility. Human capital theory, in other words, tends to be utilitarian in its conception of the good. That what is good is what maximizes economic utility. Knowledge is assumed in this theory, in this philosophy, primarily to be instrumental. That is, we pursue knowledge and cognitive skill, not for its own sake, not for its intrinsic value, but for its instrumental value in the production of economic benefit. That is, knowledge is valuable because it leads to economic efficiency and effectiveness. That is, knowledge is valuable because it is instrumental. It has instrumental value rather than intrinsic value. An education for human capital, the purpose of such an education is the development of human capital in terms of economically relevant skill. What is important educationally is that those skills and understandings and dispositions, which include socialization, those skills and dispositions are valuable relative to their economic value, relative to their influence on economic utility. The third purpose is a sorting purpose, that education and educational systems should sort and select talent and skill, identify it, develop it, and certify through degrees, through licensure, etc., the talent and skill level of the student, so that they can be then sorted into their proper position, the most efficient position in the economy. The curriculum is to be differentiated by talent and performance. That is, there will be different curricula for different students. That is, there will be curriculum tracking based upon the innate talent, a measurement of the innate talent, and the performance of the student in the beginning grades. The differentiated curriculum is necessary to fulfill the purposes of an education for human capital, to develop human capital in terms of economic skill, to inculcate the necessary dispositions, and to sort and select in an efficient way human capital for the economy. The pedagogical approach in this education, tends to be transmission. and views the teacher as manager, that the teacher manages the transmission of information and background knowledge and skill development to the students. Authority, economic interest should drive education in this philosophy. That's the primary social purpose, and the primary social value of education is economic development. There is an inherent tension in human capital theory between the democratic right to individual development, developmental liberty, and the reproduction of the workforce. This is couched in terms of the idea of correspondence theory, that the social relations of production are mirrored in the social relations of the schooling experience. This may be in tension with, perhaps contradictory to, the right of the individual to develop their full potential. And that's a question to think about and analyze in our evaluation of human capital theory. Now, based upon correspondence theory and human capital theory, there should be a fundamental mirroring between the education and the economy. That is, the education available in the society should mirror and really respond to the fundamental needs of the economy. And this is a fluid and dynamic reality. The economy changes. And in recent years, in the last decades, there's been a significant change in the structure of the economy in terms of economic globalization. And economic globalization has had a profound impact on employment opportunities in the United States and elsewhere. And this is spelled out by Michael Spence in his article, Globalization and Unemployment. His basic argument is that, and I believe quite accurate, is that there's a structural disconnection between economic efficiency and inclusiveness. There's a tension, a disalignment between how effective the economy is in terms of productivity and the distribution of employment. Globalization is changing and has changed the structure of the national economy in ways that affect different groups of workers differently. Highly educated workers are enjoying increased opportunity and income, and less educated workers are suffering a loss of opportunity and stagnant income. This is the general picture of the economy. One of the causes of this loss of opportunity for less educated workers is that routine production, routine manufacturing has been outsourced to emerging economies such as China, India, Brazil, Mexico, etc. However, at the same time, employment is growing in the high end of the tradable sector. That is the sector of the economy that can be traded in the global market. In particular, employment has grown in the areas of finance, computer design, engineering, and top-level management. Hence, there's a fundamental unemployment dilemma inherent in the structural conditions of the global economy. As Spence writes, the overall picture is clear. Employment opportunities and incomes are high and rising for the highly educated people at the upper end of the tradable sector, but they are diminishing at the lower end, end quote. Therefore, the return on education, the economic value of education, is rising, Spence argues. The highly educated, and only them, are enjoying more job opportunities and higher incomes. As Pence suggests, this is not a problem of market failure, and it's a structural distribution problem inherent in the dynamics of the current global economy. That is, the market isn't failing, the economy isn't failing per se. It's quite efficient in many ways, but we're experiencing a structural problem of distribution, and that gives rise to significant levels of unemployment. So there is a increasing important relationship in the global economy between level of educational attainment and employment opportunity and income. And as Spence suggests, the question, quote, "The question is whether the educational attainment of U.S. workers will keep pace with rising job requirements in the upper level of the economy." He argues that given these structural changes, education should be boosted. As many people as possible should be able to compete in the high end of the economy, end quote. In order for the United States to be more competitive, the argument is we need to increase its educational effectiveness. So the more education can be boosted, the greater the effectiveness, competitiveness of the economy, and the greater the employment opportunities for Americans will be. This is similar to Robert Reich's argument, very insightful argument written 20 years ago, in fact. Robert Reich pointed out that in the industrial national economy, there were certain features of that economy which are fundamentally different than what we're experiencing today in the global post-industrial economy. Industrial high-volume enterprise was based upon bureaucracy and scientific management. That is, it was a top-down hierarchical structure, organizational structure. There was large-scale national economies, and there was primarily the industrial high-volume economy was primarily focused on routine production of standardized products. This corresponding to an industrial economy was industrial high-volume schooling, which was also bureaucratically organized. It was large-scale school systems and schools. There was routine teaching and curriculum based upon transmission and socialization. There was high level of standardization of the educational experience. There's rules orientation, a sorting mechanism, and the emphasis was on functional and cultural literacy. That is, our current system, and for most of its history, beginning at the turn of the 20th century, was designed in organization, in terms of organization, in terms of curriculum, and in terms of pedagogy, to provide a labor force for an industrial national economy. And primarily this is what it remains. And Reich's argument and others have argued that this is outdated, that our current educational system does not correspond well to the economic demands of a new globalized post-industrial economy. Post-industrial high-value enterprise is different from industrial high-volume enterprise. It's organized around webs which are horizontal and decentralized rather than bureaucratic. It continually attempts to discover new linkages between solutions and needs. It's based upon rapid and informed learning. High-value enterprises are learning organizations and reward learning and problem solving. We have moved away from routine production to more customized production and services based upon experimentation. The high-value human capital is what he refers to as symbolic analysts. And the symbolic analysts, which we'll discuss in a minute, are the most valuable skills, economic skills, in the new post-industrial economy. This economy is global, and leadership is found wherever value is created. It's no longer necessarily positional, that is, linked to a position. If one creates value, then one has leadership power. So we have a very different view here of the economy, an emerging different kind of economy than an industrial economy, one that's post-industrial, high value, based in learning, organization, symbolic analysis, the creation of value, rather than routine production. Generally, we have three kinds of job categories: routine production, manufacturing, routine manufacturing jobs and work; in-person services like the medical field, legal services, McDonald's, certain kinds of jobs, waiting, waitressing, all kinds of services. And then we have a new job category, according to Wright, the symbolic analysts. And the symbolic analysts are increasingly rewarded, and they're enjoying greater opportunity and greater income. The skills of symbolic analysts include the following. Symbolic analytic skills include problem solving and problem identification. That is, symbolic analysts are adept at problem solving. They're also strategic brokers. They can link problem identifiers with problem solvers. That is, they're good at brokering and managing teams of people. They have highly developed abstract thinking capacities. They can discover hidden patterns and meanings. They have highly developed capability of judgment and interpretation. They're also developed in systems thinking. They can see the whole and understand the processes by which things are linked together. That is, they can see wholes and how parts are interconnected with each other, kind of a synthetic rather than an analytic ability, seeing holistic patterns. They are adept at experimentation and continuous learning. A fundamental skill that they possess is learning how to learn. So they're equipped to continue to learn throughout their lifetime. And they have skill in collaboration. They are consensus builders. They are very good at group learning, can interact well with groups, are articulate in groups, can express themselves well, etc. So Reich suggests that these symbolic analytic skills are very important economic cognitive skills necessary for the new post-industrial high-value economy. And this corresponds with Michael Spence's ideas of the high end of the economic sector. So here we have a view of education for human capital whose purpose would be the development of these symbolic analytic skills. And perhaps there's a convergence here with other philosophical traditions based upon independent thinking and critical thinking, and we'll examine that later as we proceed with our philosophical inquiry. In summary, the human capital theory conceives education. Primarily, the purpose of education is to develop the necessary economic skills in the population for high levels of economic productivity. And as the U.S. economy evolves and changes into a global post-industrial economy, education has become increasingly important, not only in general, but specifically in education for the development of symbolic analytic skill, which is a highly developed cognitive skills. This is the current vision for the relationship between human capital, economic development, and education. Thank you.